evacuate, it's pretty clear what the parameters are for their decision making. And this is an example of the South Florida serious game in which we were providing what science tells us are the key risks and threats for South Florida at this period of time, with 17 communities sitting around tables, somewhat like this, making decisions about what they're going to do under critical conditions. And that flows over roughly a three-hour period in which they come out with the mission-critical gaps that they've identified. And then that goes into the solution team meetings where they resolve those problems. They set up solutions to resolve those problems. This is in Central Florida, a similar serious game circumstance with the community members engaged deeply in the game. And these games are not intellectual exercises alone. They're designed to be emotional events that simulate what people feel in terms of the chaotic circumstances in large-scale disasters. So it's pretty memorable experience for most people. Now, in Central Florida, also we've got David here introducing the action team members. One piece of the Florida Disaster Resilience Initiative is to identify in a region the best intellectual resources that we build into smart swarms, that in a circumstance in which the emergency response requires huge amounts of food, and for example, in Hurricane Michael disaster areas right now, we've been working with moving 175,000 pounds of chicken into the communities around the Panhandle areas, the disaster areas, which is pretty difficult when you have no electricity. You've got trees down, you've got cordons where you've been blocked by the police or military. So we have to build what we call smart swarms, and we'll get into that discussion, that are agile enough to get around the barriers and provide food security and water and so on. It's just an example of the chicken getting to the point of getting to people who really need it. So Dominica, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more also in the next session, but I went in, I met with the Prime Minister, set up 9 tasks, and developed a master plan for one of the first climate resilient nations in the world. The devastation to the housing from Hurricane Maria was much worse than Puerto Rico. The Atlantic side, 95% of the houses were destroyed or severely damaged, which was the case in the Calinago area. The Calinago still, they're about 3,300 now, coming back from the 400. It's over a year later, they still have no electricity. So we actually have the technical solutions to avoid those circumstances now, but the issue of how you design your electrical systems probably are not going to look a lot like the central grids we have now after the kind of event that Hurricane Phoenix represents. Not when you have the ability to actually create distributed systems. So we were able to luckily get light into almost every household within a short period of time in the Calinago territory, and then we started building mesh networks and bringing in distributed systems with refrigeration and solar generation. Okay, so I want to talk about communities of opportunity. With sea level rise, Florida is becoming an archipelago, and you can see this in Pinellas County pretty clearly when you looked at the slosh map earlier where it showed the surge. There are huge portions of the county that are essentially now cut off from the mainland. And in these circumstances, we're going to have millions of refugees. And obviously the most vulnerable communities are going to be hit the hardest. And right now we don't have anything that's the equivalent of 40 acres and a mule for the populations that are most vulnerable. Where is the sustainability for our hurricane refugees? Does the city of St. Petersburg, do they have a clear plan as to how they would deal with, let's say, 300,000 climate refugees? So when these large transitions happen, as a result of catastrophic events, the human tragedy can be excessive. And in high severity crises, it's not going to be unusual in Florida in future events to see millions of people not only at risk, but now actually threatened by the loss of all of what produced the kind of wonderful lifestyle that we now enjoy. So what can we do in terms of creating sustainable communities of opportunity? Is it possible that we could actually create within St. Petersburg, for example, communities of opportunity that could receive these climate refugees, with social justice being at the foundation, social equity being the foundation of how these communities of opportunity would receive climate refugees and give them a life that they believe would serve their children and that would be sustainable. So a few questions to you. So if West Florida built communities of opportunity and made an effort to become one of the areas that led with climate resilient communities, what is the possibility of building a green, water-based political economy here? So St. Petersburg used to be a blue economy, if you will, or an aqua economy, a green, water-based economy. What would it mean to set up communities of opportunity in the areas that are not destroyed in advance, that would serve, if there is not any destruction going forward, if we're lucky, and would provide a better quality of life that's more consistent with a low carbon footprint, for example, but would also lead in a new type of economy that would also be more equitable. Is that something that would be desirable? And if so, could we see St. Petersburg being reconfigured to work within the carrying capacity of its biomes and be in a region in which other communities are now working within their carrying capacity? And how could we shape a society that is more of a cherishing and has more engagement in cherishing and nurturing its ecosystems and the future evolution of our humanity, thinking that maybe we could be better than we are today. Not only do we face risks, but we have the opportunity potentially to become something better. So how will Floridians become prepared and sustainable ahead of what's coming? And what would it look like? So I guess that's my question to you going into the question and answer session. What do you want your city to look like? What do you want this region to look like? And is that something that we can start engaging now? What if we had 100 acres of the city of St. Petersburg that was committed to a blue political economy, that was based in something that would attract capital, would create jobs, and would also be more equitable? Thank you.